Hey there, Anomalies. Welcome to another episode of the Anomalous Educator podcast, where we help teachers discover ways to make side income or replace their income entirely online. Today, my guest is Holly Jensen.
Was figuring out this whole teaching thing because you can...
We're going to talk about how her family's support was key for her to overcome an obstacle that most of us would consider insurmountable. We'll chat about her love of Celtic music, and we'll talk about how none of us, including me, have any excuses when it comes to reaching our dreams. I'm your host, Ray Blakney, and I can't wait to get started. Enjoy the show. Hey there, Anomalies. Welcome to another episode of the Anomalous Educator podcast. It is my pleasure today to have Holly Jensen on the show with us. Holly is an amazing online teacher, and she has a small secret, but we're not going to reveal that until about halfway through the podcast. Let's see if you guys can figure out what her secret is as we start talking about her experiences. This, I hope, will be an inspirational episode for a lot of people who are looking to get into the online education space, whether it be as a tutor or as a course creator or something else. Let's get started. So, Holly, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Holly and I, in the sake of full disclosure, have actually known each other on and off for a few years online, but this is the first time we're talking in person. Holly is a very experienced teacher. She's got a master's in linguistics. She loves audio dramas, and she loves teaching. For her, teaching is like a passion. It's not a profession. She just happens to get paid to do it as well. One little interesting fact about Holly, she gave me one, but I'm going to mention another one that I know about her. She is a talented Celtic singer. How do you pronounce that? I always get that wrong. Celtic singer. And yeah. She's written poems as a kid, and apparently those poems need to be read in an Irish accent. Can these poems be found anywhere online, Holly, or are they lost?
No, they're not lost. They are just not typed. I wrote them. Oh gosh, I'm trying to think. Did I write them? I can't even remember now. I think I wrote them in like an old school format.
What is old school format to you? I might be dating myself.
Old paper.
Oh, good God. I think I've heard of that. No,
Have you heard of cassettes too?
I actually think I had them back in, I'm a child of the 80s. I had my cassette decks and, ripping and copying cassettes and all that stuff. But the really fancy ones were the ones where you could put two cassettes in at the same time, right? So you could copy from one cassette.
Ooh, yes.
Could never afford one of those.
Double play.
Exactly. So I think we're all dating ourselves. Kids, if you need, if you're under 25 and don't know what a cassette is, Google it. You can look at these videos on how cassettes used to work. So, okay, well, we'll keep an eye out for those poems somewhere. So the reason I wanted to talk to Holly is she's been teaching online for years, and I wanted to hear a little bit about her experience. So I'm going to start with a question, and this is going to give you guys a little bit of a hint to what makes Holly special, other than being an amazing teacher. But Holly, what led you into teaching? Was this what you always wanted to do as a kid, or did something change in your life to cause you to want to become a teacher?
Oh, good heavens. No, like if you had told me, I would say, gosh, how time gets away from you. But if you had told me, like, I would say probably 12 years ago, 11 years ago, that I would end up teaching as a profession and loving it, I probably would have said, are you crazy? I was really led. I mean, I can't think of a better word for it. And as a Christian, it's a perfect word because things happened just all along. I had a couple of short stints teaching and tutoring Braille. And then I ended up, my start in ESL was pretty much as a summer intern/volunteer at an organization in my local area that helps refugees. And they said, we're going to put you in our English classes. And I said, I thought to myself, I did not say, I was afraid you were going to say that. But I ended up loving it. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. But I observed the teachers who were there, and I just, said, hey, would you want me to do this? And I made some suggestions as to how I could be of help. And they were all for it. And I was really sad to leave. Fast forward a number of years, and that was the sort of culminating experience that when it finally came time for me to really choose a career, and where to get a master's, what to do with it, that was a very defining experience that told me that was what I wanted to do. And then the university that I chose, their ESL or TESL department was couched within the linguistics. So you had two choices within linguistics, and one of them was TESL. So that's sort of how it happened. And then after graduation, looking for a job, I repeat that because that's what it felt like. And I stumbled upon, and I actually say that slightly facetiously, a company that was basically teaching group classes online and streaming them live through YouTube. And I remember being so excited, I could hardly get to sleep, because I was like, assuming that I can use the software, I could do this. And it would, and it was just, and I could see myself doing it. I could just put myself in that teacher's place. It was the coolest thing. And you have to understand, it was such a wow factor, because when I was doing my master's, I don't even remember teaching ESL online being mentioned. So this was like totally novel thing. And so, but that pointed me in the right direction to start looking. And yeah, here I am.
That's the world of online. I studied computer engineering in college. And I remember getting out of college and looking in the workplace. And this kind of shows you the disconnect between kind of education and especially online or kind of the tech world right now. And I include online teaching in that. They're kind of behind in almost everything. So when I got out of college, I was using a language that, most of the people in the professional world considered antique. I mean, nobody even heard about it. And I hadn't even been taught the basics of a lot of this stuff that was considered just kind of run of the mill in the professional world. And it sounds like you had a similar experience when you were coming out as an English teacher. They have these kind of older curriculums they didn't take into account, right?
Yeah, they didn't. They really didn't. And, there was a little bit of I had for a time thought I might become a web developer. So on the online world wasn't strange to me. I had taken an online class, but I almost chickened out. Because when I started applying and it looked like, I might actually be able to do this, I started thinking, can I really do this? So I took a trial lesson with a company that you probably know of, LiveLingua.
Uh-huh.
And
I've heard of them, I think. I'd have to look them up. Yeah. And that was your first lesson online?
Yeah, it was my first, I would say, video lesson online. The other online class that I had taken during my master's was mostly, it was pretty much materials in a, what you call it? My mind just went blank. In modules on Blackboard, using Blackboard. And we just did the work and submitted it on time.
So that, yeah, totally different kind of online education. So
yes.
You were talking about, when you were talking about this whole story of how you kind of got into this world, that you discovered in that moment when you were kind of working as a volunteer that you loved teaching. And I find that a lot of teachers and people who go into it, there's two ways they can get there. The first is that they have this aha moment like you did. And the other one is it builds up over years. And then one day they wake up and they realize, wow, I really love what I'm doing, but it took them years to get there. So in your case, what is it that you loved about teaching? Kind of what was it that said, oh my gosh, this might be what my calling is?
Part of it was interacting with the people from the other cultures and having to, I was forced to learn a little bit of their language because most of the students I was working with at the time had really no English beyond hello, how are you, thank you, goodbye. And so if I wanted to give any kind of instructions, they were very basic instructions, but I had to learn to say it in Hmong, which was actually the primary language that a lot of them spoke, which is a mountain language from like Laos and Thailand, Vietnam area. And I've always loved interacting with people from other cultures. That was something that has been around for a long time. But I think the other thing was that I love helping people and languages. So it was like this sort of perfect combination of helping people. And I myself got a certain feeling of accomplishment from that. And then working with people from other cultures, plus just languages. I had studied languages before, studied German before, and so it was like this sort of mesh between a lot of different things that I've always loved.
So it was the perfect fit of everything kind of coming together. And it took that experience for you to realize it, right? I mean, kind of the epiphany of the moment. Here's an interesting question. Now, as an experienced teacher with a master's in linguistics, if you had to go back to yourself, you said, 10 or 12 years ago, and give yourself some tips on how to deal with those teachers, with those students who don't speak a word of English. I think that'd be really interesting for a lot of people who are just starting off teaching or have never taught before. How do you teach people who, almost know nothing about the subject matter? In this case, languages, which is even a bigger barrier. What would you tell yourself from way back then? What tips and tricks could you give them?
Ooh, that's a loaded question, which is fine. Gosh, I think I would tell myself to kind of do what I did and just jump in and be watchful. Again, like I was, but maybe even more so. Be watchful. Take every opportunity you can to observe others doing what you're doing. And don't be too quick to form opinions about what they're doing. I think, sadly, one of the things that I found myself doing was thinking, like, I would watch certain things. I'm like, I wouldn't do it that way. And then I find out later when I'm getting educated in this stuff that actually they were pretty good. So, be watchful with and be open.
So that would be your advice for your 10-year younger self, I would say.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. And now that you've been teaching for a while, related to all of that, can you share with us kind of one of your favorite teaching experiences, kind of a story of a student or something that happened to you as a teacher that cemented the idea that you are on the right path and you're doing what you were meant to do?
Well, actually, I've got a couple, and I'll make them quick. The first one was actually with my very first student, who I have thanked time and time again for his patience with the newbie. And there was one time when I think we were talking about either it was discouragement or lack of motivation. I don't remember the exact thing, but I was able to be compassionate and encouraging. And that is, again, something that I love to do. And that was like one moment when it was just like, I felt in my soul, I was made to do this. And then a bit later, there was a husband and wife teacher group that I was teaching. Loved teaching them, and watching the shy elderly husband kind of come out of his shell was an amazing thing. And then at the end, though, we had our final session before I temporarily left LiveLingua, and his wife told me this little story about right after my first lesson with the husband, because I started with him by himself and then his wife joined us. So she said that after his first lesson with me, he was Skyping with her. She was out of the country at the time. And he told her, I want to learn English now.
So why had he learned before? I mean, was it his wife who was making him take the classes then? Do you know?
It was kind of circumstances and I think family pressure. They were facing possible immigration. And it was, I think it was a mix of family and life pressure. And he was very shy in the beginning, very reserved, I think personality-wise and culture-wise. He, I guess, after his first lesson, wanted to learn English.
Wow. So you inspired him just with that first lesson. And you talked about how he was kind of shy, but he kind of came out as a shell when he was talking to you. Could you tell us a little bit about what you did to get him out of his shell? I mean, what were some techniques you applied, or were you conscious of it?
You know what? I really don't think it was totally me. Again, I think I've mentioned that I am a Christian, and I believe that we're given certain skills and we're helped along the way to use them. But really, it was kind of this mix of being willing to joke. Because I got to tell you, the folks that were raised in the former Soviet era may seem reserved and quiet, but they are hilarious. Oh my word. And so I also had studied part of his language before. And so I used a little bit of that in the class. I'm not against using the target language when and if appropriate. And that really helped him to feel more comfortable, especially with the older students. I think it adds, it lowers the affective filter. It creates comfort. And I think that helped. And I laugh a lot in my classes, and I think that made him feel a little more free to do so. And so, and that's all I can think of that's tangible that happened. And I think part of it was just willing to let him be shy, but also push a little bit. So I pushed, but I would also, especially when we were with his wife, who was more outgoing, I would let him be the second to give examples. So he could watch his wife do it and watch me correct her if needed first, and let him kind of study it out and think it out first. And I think that was helpful. Pay attention to your students.
That's actually a perfect segue and a wonderful story into my next question for you. And we're going to go into our break right now, and that's going to take us into the second part of our interview, where we're going to talk about, we were talking a little bit before I started recording about this, and I'd like to kind of dig deeper into your thoughts there. So we'll be right back.
We interrupt our regularly scheduled programming for this important announcement. Are you suffering from chronic teacheritis? Do you suffer from regular outbreaks of, "This is not why I became a teacher," "I can't make ends meet on a teacher's salary," or "Why do I have to use this useless material for my students?" Then a weekly dose of the Anomalous Educator podcast could be the pseudo-magical solution you are looking for. It has unscientifically been proven to help teachers cure teacheritis and learn how to make a side income, or replace their entire income by teaching online using methods they know are best without having to use some government-mandated material. It has also been shown to provide more free time to spend with friends and family. To report your case of teacheritis today, please log on to the website www.anomalouseducator.com or subscribe to this podcast. The Anomalous Educator podcast is most effective if taken with a glass of wine after a hard day at school. Warning! Side effects may include sudden urges to quit your jobs, travel the world, and start improving educational systems and lives of students everywhere. Please consult your physician before starting. We now return to our regularly scheduled programming.
And welcome back. So you just said you were able to listen to your students. That's one of the amazing things about being able to teach online, and especially in the kind of tutoring sessions. It's a little different if you teach an online course with multiple students, but you're able to teach one-on-one or one-on-two. So you're able to get this personalized attention to your students. What other differences have you found, for example, when you're giving classes private, one-on-one, let's say, and to groups, to larger groups? Kind of what are the benefits, pros and cons to both of those in your opinion?
The benefits, I think this is both pro and a con in a way in the one-on-one setting. The one-on-one setting allows you to devote your total attention to that one student, and in a way that can make them feel very cared about, however, it's a con in the sense that I think there's more empathy in a group. There may be more chances for embarrassment. There may be a heightened sense of, oh my gosh, what if I make a mistake? But at the same time, there's more empathy, and there's also more, it can be more dynamic. I've taught a bit larger groups of, like, say 7 or 8 before, and there are a lot of dynamics that can happen, which can be pretty cool.
And that helps. So do you have a belief that, what's your thought on which one's the best, or do you think people should mix them, or something else? Like, between private and group classes, what do you think would benefit?
Are you talking about teachers or students?
I'd say students in this case.
Students, that one's kind of tricky. I think it really depends on the student. I think some students, studying in a group can be very enlivening, very helpful. In some ways, there might even be less pressure because you can let someone else give examples and watch the teacher kind of correct and guide them first and develop your own thoughts. If that's the type of learner you are. One of my sort of mentors in absentia, Jason Tiedick, talks about someone called a research learner who needs to read and observe first before they're asked to create. And so a group setting can be helpful for that, instead of them being the only one called on in class, for example. But it really depends on who you are, and mixing them, or at least trying to mix them, could be helpful.
Yeah, that actually, a little side story that me and my wife went through once, kind of focusing on that. You were talking about the private and how having somebody focus on you all the time can lead into that. We were in Peru a few years ago doing the Incan Trail. And after the trail, we decided to kind of treat ourselves, and we went to take a train ride between 2 cities, which is Cusco and Lake Titicaca. And so we show up to the train the day that we're supposed to go, and it's kind of a small train. So it should have about 20 couples, 30 couples or families on there. And it was odd because we showed up about 15 minutes early, and it's usually full of foreigners. So we thought, wow, nobody else is here. Most of us foreigners kind of show up 10 minutes early. The departure time comes, and we kind of get up on the train, and nobody else is there. What ends up happening is we made a reservation. There was some kind of mix-up in their reservation system online. And we ended up having this private train to ourselves for 8 hours going through the Andes, which in a way was amazing. But in another way, going back to what you said about the private, was really, really stressful because there were 20 waiters in the food cabinet. It was only us. They would bring us back for the musicians to play, and the second band was awful, and we couldn't leave because it was only us. If there were 20 other families, people there, we just gotten up and walked away. We couldn't do that. So I can definitely understand that, there are benefits to the whole private thing, but it isn't for everybody. And there's, I think, for a limited amount of time, they should be, you shouldn't be able to do that all day, every day. 8 straight hours of it for us was way too much work. It was too much social pressure. So I can definitely relate to the story that you were telling. So I'm going to ask one other question now. And this might lead into what I alluded to at the beginning. To all you listeners out there, as you can tell, Holly's an experienced teacher. She knows what she's talking about, but there's one little secret there that makes her even more exceptional. So this may lead to it, may not. Otherwise, I'll bring it up after the end of the question. What has been your biggest challenge in teaching and teaching online specifically?
Ooh, Actually, my biggest challenge hasn't really been connected to the secret.
Okay.
Believe it or not.
Well, then say your challenge, and then I'll sell the secret
surprising.
afterwards.
Yeah, there
exactly,
is.
Exactly. I thought that was me.
My really biggest challenge has been myself. I'll tell you why. Because you go through times when you have a lot of students, and this is something to kind of, I guess, prepare yourself for and realize that you may have to overcome if you decide to start teaching online. You can have a lot of students, and if they're one-on-one, they need individual attention, and you want to provide that. But there's only so much of you to go around. And so you can sometimes feel that you're not giving of yourself as much as you would want to. You're not giving each student the level of support that you want to, because there only is so much of you to go around. And then added to that, teaching online was my first job. Prior to that, my only real teaching experience had been as a conversation partner and as handling a few lessons in a group setting to a traditional classroom while I was doing a sort of student teaching thing. And so besides that whole thing back in my early 20s when I did the refugee thing, but that was kind of even more strange. So it was figuring out this whole teaching thing, because this new environment and all of the dynamics of it can make you temporarily forget that you even got an education. So that has been a challenge, but the sort of, I like to leave people with hope. Those things are overcomable, if that's even a word. Wow, I'm an English teacher.
I was about to say, you're the teacher here. I would not contradict you on that.
They are not insurmountable. There we go.
Speaking of insurmountable goals, then, we can reveal to everybody who's been listening for the last 20 minutes or so what most people would consider an insurmountable goal. I mentioned that you and I worked together for years before I even knew that this was part of who you were. Could you share with the audience now, if people haven't already guessed, what I would say the secret is, as we're using it in this podcast?
Okay, sure. I am totally blind.
There you go, folks. So
yeah.
Very few of you out there, I know this from a lot of entrepreneurs and teachers I talk to, there are always reasons why you say you can't start teaching online, create your online business in education. I would challenge any listener, please email me if this is the case, if they have a better excuse than that. And Holly didn't let that be an excuse. She, used that to her benefit. Now she's doing it every single day. So Holly, could you speak a little bit more as to how you were able to overcome that challenge in the online space? Most people say, oh, Skype is too hard. You had to do a few more things than just, learn how to install Skype. What are some of the biggest challenges you've had with your disability, and how have you overcome them?
Some of the biggest challenges, really, I think the biggest challenge is UI. Which stands for user interface. Whether you are talking about the user interface on the website, or the user interface on Skype, or whatever software you choose to use, because I'm totally blind, I use something called a screen reader, which is text to speech. Basically, it reads for me everything that's on the screen and allows me to click and clack and whatever without a mouse, mostly without a mouse. And there are sometimes things about the UI, if any little bit of innovative code is used that the screen reader hasn't been programmed to interpret or interact with, something breaks down. And the screen reader isn't able to work well, or it reads extra things. Like, for example, there's often a form field on a lot of forms that says, if you are human, don't fill this in. Well, the screen reader makes that seem fillable. And a lot of things like that. And also, just getting those things changed or worked on can be difficult, especially if you work for a big company that has a lot of moving parts and a lot of team members. That puts such needs lower on the priority. And I'm not, trying to badmouth anybody. I'm not going to mention any names. And in case the listeners are thinking anything, present company excluded. Okay.
Of course.
Yeah. I'm referring to much large companies. You get it just gets lower on the priority list, and it's kind of understandable because you are a much smaller fish in that pond, and you don't represent the wider sort of base, if you will. And it's unfortunate. It's sad, and in a perfect world that wouldn't be the case, but this is not a perfect world. And so thankfully those kind of things don't come up too much, especially compared to years and years ago. I can remember when Skype was hardly usable. I can remember when other programs were hardly usable, and they really have, kudos to them, stepped up to the plate and made it happen. As to how I overcome them, sometimes you can't. Sometimes you just have to find a way to work around them or find a way to do something else. Sometimes you contact people, especially if you contact them in a nice way, a non-demanding way. They're usually quite willing to at least listen. And really, again, it just goes back to my faith. A lot of the challenges that come from being blind, there isn't a whole lot you can do about them. So you just, at least in my case, I try to ask for provision. I ask for provision, a way around it, another way to do what I need to do. Ask for help. People and the Lord, I ask for help. I ask for help a lot.
As we all should.
Yeah.
Well, we will be right back. Hey there, Anomalies. Ray here. I hope you're enjoying this interview. This is just a short reminder that if you like what you're hearing on the Anomalous Educator, you should subscribe to the show on wherever you get your podcasts. That way you won't miss any of our weekly episodes. If you have time to take that extra step, you can leave a review for me as well. If you prefer to tell me directly what you think of the show, just go to the website anomalouseducator.com. That's ANOMALOUSEDUCATOR.com. Yeah, it's a mouthful. And you can email me directly through our Contact Us page. Thanks in advance. Now, back to the show. And we're back. So a question, were you born blind, or was this something that happened later in your life?
I was born blind.
Okay, so for as long as you can remember. Well, obviously.
It's a genetic disease.
Okay, so you've gone through school all the way, reading Braille. Did you go to a special school, or did you go to public high school, for example, or public schools?
I was incredibly blessed. The program has changed, but at when I was younger, the city near where I live had some of the best education for the blind in the state. It was what we might call semi-mainstreamed. So for the 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic, I was in the class for the visually impaired because they had the teachers that knew Braille and all of that. And for other things, activities and other things, I was in a class of at least 30 other students who were all sighted. Occasionally, sometimes I was in a class where there was one other blind student because especially in middle and high school, they would send instructional aides into the classrooms with us to help us handle the visual stuff. And it eased the load on them if two students in the same grade had classes together, which was fine. It worked out just fine. And so I kind of had the best of both worlds. I was and am fully literate in Braille, and a lot of those concepts can be transferred to the ideas of print. And so it really hasn't hindered me in being able to do things for my students. There are certain things like visual formatting of things that gets interesting, but we work it out. And yeah, I just have somebody check it or whatever. And so it was good because it helped me develop social skills. I don't have any trouble interacting with sighted people, which is sometimes the case for people who are raised blind. Unfortunately, the social skills kind of don't get addressed as much. And yeah, that was kind of a long form answer. Sorry.
No.
I wanted to say that old school format I mentioned in the beginning. I think I wrote those poems in Braille.
You think? So you sometimes write in Braille, you sometimes write in Latin characters then?
No, well, I had in high school and college, I had this thing called a note taker, and it was basically Braille Writer meets Palm Pilot. And the one I had at the time I wrote the poems was basically mostly what it did was let you create files and you could print them or get them embossed in Braille. And I cannot for the life of me remember if I wrote them on that or if I actually brailled them, and I would need to check in my old papers and see.
You have an incredible story, Holly. I think it's going to be an inspiration to a lot of people. So what do you have planned for the future then? Because, you're still young. You have your life is ahead of you. What are some of the plans you have for the future?
Some of those I think I'm going to keep under my hat for now, but basically I really want to hone my teaching skills to find some more time for professional development. I would like to find time also for some volunteer work. There are other volunteer type things that I would love to do. Yeah. I think those are the two main things I'd like to mention is just honing my teaching skills. There's so much to learn and languages are so fascinating. Oh yeah, and I want to actually become fluent in German, Russian, or both or more.
Good for you. I mean, ambition is great and you should set the goals really high. And I'm sure you can learn German and Russian and anything else you set your mind to. So Holly, thanks for coming on the show. For any of our listeners who may want to get in touch with you, is there any way they can do so? Kind of a Facebook, Twitter? Yeah,
I do have a Facebook. I think if you search for Holly Jensen, you might find me. There are more Holly Jensens out there.
We'll put that in the show notes. So if anybody's interested, we'll put the correct one in the show notes for this podcast so people can click on that. So they're not contacting the wrong Holly Jensen.
Right. Well, and probably the best way to reach me directly might be email. So teacherholly36@gmail.com. That would be teacherholly36@gmail.com. That will end up directly to me. I don't have a super assistant who handles those things. So
Not yet. One day you will, right? Well, Holly, thanks for coming
we shall see.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks for coming on the Anomalous Educator podcast. It has been a pleasure to speak with you.
It has been an honor to come. Thank you.
And that's it for our show. I hope you enjoyed this chat with the inspirational Holly Jensen. If you've been inspired to take the leap and start earning income online by sharing your knowledge, check out our interview with Alex Asher in episode 5. We talk about tools you can use to start teaching online right now. If you enjoyed this episode of the Anomalous Educator podcast, please don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. In our next episode, we'll be talking to Sherry Elpel. She's an expert in course design, and she's going to walk us through her 7 steps to great course design. Whether you're new to teaching or have been teaching for over 30 years, you can learn something from Sherry. Talk to you all next Monday.